The debt is not a metaphor. Captain Ava Rostova stood on the bridge of the starship Vindication, a lone human bastion in a sea of alien starlight. Before them hung the planet Elara, a world wrapped in chains of light, beautiful and terrible. These were not defensive grids or orbital habitats. They were conduits siphoning the very lifeblood of a civilization into the waiting coffers of the Koru Enclave. The stakes were simple. An entire species was being legally and systematically bled dry, and Rostova's fleet was the only witness with the power to object. She felt the cold hum of the deck plates beneath her boots, a vibration that mirrored the simmering anger in her gut, an anger she had to control. Within the hour, she would have to face them, not with weapons, but with words, a challenge that would culminate in a public inquiry before the assembled quorum of the Galactic Compact. Her first officer, Commander Jian Li, stepped beside her, his gaze fixed on the main viewer. "The Koru have acknowledged our presence, Captain. They've transmitted their standard greeting packet and a preliminary gratitude invoice for our use of their managed spacetime." The words were delivered with professional calm, but Rostova could hear the tightly coiled tension beneath them. This was how the Koru operated, not with fleets of warships, but with legions of clerks and unassailable contracts. They turned worlds into accounting entries. Archimedes Rostova said, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the bridge. "Analyze the invoice. Every clause, every subsection. Find the poison pill." The ship's integrated fleet mind, a consciousness of pure logic and crystalline data, responded instantly. Its avatar, a simple geometric lattice of light, shimmered into existence on a secondary screen. Already parsed, Captain, the AI's synthesized voice reported calm and devoid of emotion. "The document is flawless under current compact commercial law. It asserts that by entering their declared sphere of influence, we have implicitly accepted their offer of navigational stability and temporal synchronization. The demanded tithe is calculated at 0.08% of our vessel's estimated operational energy budget per diem." Rostova's jaw tightened. It was an old trick, the fine print of the universe applied on a scale that beggared belief. "So they're billing us for existing in their neighborhood." Jian scoffed, a rare breach of his stoic composure. "It's extortion, plain and simple." But it wasn't simple. It was elegant, insidious, and according to the AI, perfectly legal. That was the core of the problem, a cancer of jurisprudence that had metastasized across this entire sector. Their law was a perfectly crafted cage. Before the fleet had arrived, they had monitored the whispers from this system. A family on Elara living in a small agrarian commune spoke through a shielded channel. The father's voice was heavy with a quiet despair. "They took my daughter yesterday," he'd said, the transmission grainy, but the pain perfectly clear, "not by force. They came with a scroll and a ledger. Said her education, her health care, the very air she breathed, had accrued a gratitude debt her parents could not pay. She is now indentured for a standard 80 cycles. She is 9 years old." That single heartbreaking story had solidified Rostova's resolve. This was not a negotiation. It was a rescue. The Elara are bound by something called the First Contact Gratitude Mandate. Archimedes stated its light pattern shifting to display ancient legal text. The Koru arrived centuries ago, offering technological and societal uplift. In return, the Elara agreed to a perpetual tithe, a percentage of all their production energy and even population, as a sign of their unending thankfulness. It was slavery by another name, gift-wrapped in legal precedent. This was the mechanism of ruin, the engine of galactic-scale theft that operated in plain sight. The debt was the weapon and gratitude was the ammunition. Rostova turned away from the shimmering image of the enslaved planet. She looked at her crew, at the determined faces of men and women who had sworn to uphold the principles of the Terran Alliance, principles of freedom and self-determination that seemed to have no currency here. "The Koru have made their first move by invoicing us," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound purpose. "They believe their legal framework is impenetrable. They believe we will pay their petty tax and move on, leaving the Alara to their fate." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle on the bridge. They are mistaken. A path was forming in her mind, a narrow, treacherous route through a forest of legal thorns. It wasn't about finding a flaw in their contracts. It was about honoring them so completely, so perfectly, that the contracts themselves would become the Koru's undoing. "Commander Lee," she ordered, her tone sharp as forged steel, "prepare a formal reply. We will accept their invoice. We will pay it. But we will also be submitting an invoice of our own." Archimedes' avatar pulsed with a soft, inquisitive light. "Captain, on what legal grounds can we issue an invoice, Wu? We have provided no service." Rostova smiled, a cold, predatory thing. "Oh, I think we have." She began to pace the plan, crystallizing with every step. The Koru pride themselves on their meticulous accounting. Every action has a value, every service a cost. They've billed us for the service of navigating their space. Very well. Archimedes calculate the energy expenditure of our arrival. Every joule used to decelerate every microsecond of computational power. Our systems used to avoid their commercial traffic, every watt of power our deflector shields used to repel the micrometeoroids they have failed to clear from their own shipping lanes. Jian's eyes widened in understanding. "You're going to bill them for the cost of avoiding them." It was audacious. It was petty. And it was exactly the kind of logic the Koru would be forced to recognize. Their own system demanded it. Precisely, Rostova confirmed. "We will itemize every single thing. We will cite the intersystem transit and safety accords, which require a managing authority to provide clear and safe passage. Their failure to do so has incurred costs on our end. We are not their guests. We are a foreign vessel navigating in accordance with galactic law. A system built on counting every penny could be bled by a single perfectly accounted drop." The AI's light lattice flickered. "The calculation is complete, Captain. The total energy expenditure converted to standard compact credits at the prevailing market rate is significant. It is approximately 500% larger than their invoice to us." A low murmur went through the bridge crew. This was a language the Koru would understand perfectly. It was the language of the ledger, the only language that held any real power in this part of the galaxy. Rostova nodded, satisfied. "Send it," she commanded. "And with it transmit our official request for a public inquiry into the administration of the Alara system under the Gratitude Mandate. We are filing it on the grounds of gross economic disparity and violation of the Sentient Dignity Clause of the Compact Charter." This was the real attack. The invoice was just the opening salvo, the jab to get their attention. The public inquiry was the killing blow she was aiming for. They had built their empire on the fine print. She would dismantle it with the headlines. The Koru response came faster than she expected. It was not a legal counter-argument or a demand for clarification. It was an image, a live feed from the surface of Alara. A public square filled with gaunt, weary Alarans. In the center, a Koru arbiter stood before a young family, a mother, a father, and 2 small children. The arbiter held up a data slate. The message was clear, a silent threat delivered across the void. "Proceed, and these people will pay the price for your interference." It was a classic move of a bully using the very people she was trying to save as a shield. Jian clenched his fists. They're threatening civilians. That's a clear violation. Rostova cut him off. A violation we can't prove was a direct response to our actions. To the compact, it will look like a routine enforcement of their tithe. They know it. They are daring us to back down. This was the first major escalation, a move designed to test her resolve, to see if her human morality was a weakness they could exploit. Archimedes remained silent, its logical processors calculating the probabilities. The AI would likely advise retreat. The risk to the Alarans had just increased exponentially. The potential for a diplomatic incident that could embroil the entire Terran alliance was now very real. A moral line is only a weakness if you are afraid to stand on it. Archimedes Rostova said, her voice dangerously calm. What is the penalty for filing a frivolous claim for public inquiry? The AI responded without hesitation. The filer is liable for all associated administrative and legal costs incurred by both parties, as well as a punitive sanction determined by the quorum. It was a massive financial and political risk. If she lost the vindication, and the alliance would be on the hook for an astronomical sum, and her career would be over. The Koru were counting on that fear. And what is the definition of frivolous, she pressed. A claim filed without a reasonable basis of evidence or one intended solely to harass, Archimedes replied. Rostova looked at the image of the Alaran family, their faces a mask of quiet terror. We have our evidence, she said softly. Their entire civilization is our evidence. Commander, reaffirm our request for the inquiry, make it immediate, and attach our second invoice. Jian looked confused. Second invoice, she would teach them the true meaning of accountability. Yes, Rostova confirmed. Bill them for the processing power and crew hours required to receive and analyze their unsolicited threat. Cite emotional distress damages for the bridge crew. Use the most obscure, verbose, and ironclad clauses you can find in the commercial code. We are going to bury them in their own paperwork. We will be so meticulous, so completely and utterly dedicated to their own system of accounting that they will choke on it. This was her answer to their escalation. She would not meet their cruelty with anger, but with an avalanche of crushing, pedantic, and legally unimpeachable procedure. The strategy was set. The Vindication was not a warship in this fight. It was a law firm with a fusion core. Every officer, every crew member became a paralegal. They began compiling data, cross-referencing Koru commercial filings from the last 5 centuries, searching for any inconsistency, any procedural error they could leverage. The ship's mess halls, normally filled with chatter and laughter, became silent libraries of legal precedent. The air crackled with a new kind of intensity, the quiet fury of a bureaucracy preparing for war. The ledger itself was being sharpened into a blade. A junior ensign, a young woman named Anya Sharma from the astrometrics department, brought something to Jian. It was a discrepancy in the Koru's energy production reports for the Alara system. Commander, she said, her voice trembling slightly with excitement, the Koru have been claiming a certain percentage of Alara's planetary energy output as part of their tithe. But their own public filings show that nearly 20% of that energy is being sold to a neighboring system at a significant markup. Jian brought the report to Rostova. They aren't just taking a tithe, he explained, a grim light in his eyes. They're running a black market energy operation and using the Alara's debt as a cover. They're stealing from the people they claim to be uplifting, then selling the stolen goods back to the Galactic community. This was it. This was more than just a moral outrage. It was wire fraud on an interstellar scale. It was a clear, provable crime, a crack in the Koru's perfectly constructed legal fortress. Their greed had finally written a check. Their law could not cash. Archimedes Rostova ordered, "Package that evidence, encrypt it, prepare it for submission to the quorum at the opening of the inquiry, and start a new file. I want a full audit of every Koru operation in this sector. We are no longer just freeing Elara. We are dismantling an empire." The mission had changed. It had escalated from a simple rescue to a full-blown prosecution. Rostova was no longer just a captain. She was about to become the star witness in the biggest fraud trial this arm of the galaxy had ever seen. The announcement came 3 days later. The compact quorum had accepted her petition. A public inquiry was scheduled. The Koru would be compelled to appear and defend their administration of the gratitude mandate. They had tried to intimidate her to make her back down. Instead, they had handed her the very stage she needed. They would have to stand before the assembled powers of the compact and explain their system out loud for all to hear. The corridor of law gambit had been initiated. Their pride had led them directly into her trap. Before the inquiry began, Rostova opened a channel to the Alaran resistance, the same small group that had sent the initial desperate message. An elder of their people appeared on screen, her face lined with age and sorrow, but her eyes held a spark of defiance. "We have heard what you are doing, Captain," she said, her voice a whisper of static. "For centuries we have honored the agreement. We believed it was a matter of integrity. We did not understand that integrity without scrutiny is just a cage." Rostova felt a profound sense of connection to the old woman. "The Koru have used your honor against you," she replied. "We intend to give it back." The elder nodded slowly. "There is something you should know. The original mandate. The one our ancestors signed. It was not just a document of debt. It was also a promise. They promised to teach us, to guide us until we could stand on our own among the stars. They were to be our mentors. A promise. That was the missing piece, the element that Archimedes' purely logical analysis could never have found. The Koru had not just created a contract. They had broken a sacred vow. A promise is a debt that cannot be repaid with mere credits. The day of the inquiry arrived. The bridge of the Vindication transformed into a remote courtroom. Holographic projectors hummed to life, creating a shimmering representation of the quorum chamber. Representatives from a dozen star-faring species materialized in their designated seats. The crystalline forms of the silicates, the gaseous entities of the Cygnus Veil, the stern avian figures of the Talvorn Federation, and in the center a raised platform for the accused, the Koru enclave represented by a tall, impossibly thin being named Arbiter Corvallis. His face was a mask of serene arrogance. Corvallis began, his voice smooth and condescending. "We are here today because the Terran Alliance in its youthful exuberance has misunderstood a simple commercial arrangement. The gratitude mandate is a testament to the enduring power of mutually beneficial agreements. The Alara thrive under our guidance, and we are compensated for our considerable efforts. To question this is to question the very foundation of interstellar commerce." He spoke of ledgers and obligations, of assets and returns. He painted a picture of benevolent administration. He spoke of numbers, ignoring the souls they represented. Rostova listened patiently, letting him build his own gallows. She watched the faces of the quorum members. Some looked bored, others sympathetic to the Koru's argument. The weight of interstellar law was on their side. She had to change the entire conversation from one of commerce to one of morality. When it was her turn to speak, she did not address the arbiter or the quorum. She turned her gaze to the public record, to the millions of beings watching across the compact. I am Captain Ava Rostova of the Terran vessel Vindication. She began, her voice steady and clear. We are not here to debate the finer points of commercial law. We are here to talk about a promise. She projected the testimony of the Alaran elder, the story of the Koru's original vow to be mentors, not masters. The Koru speak of a contract, but they omit the preamble. They omit the spirit of the law in favor of its letter. They have turned a promise of guidance into a shackle of perpetual debt. They had taught the Alara the meaning of debt, but not the meaning of freedom. Arbiter Corvallis waved a dismissive three-fingered hand. A promise, a sentimental notion. The mandate is a legal document, not a poem. It outlines a clear and quantifiable exchange. We have fulfilled our obligations to the letter. Rostova seized the opening. To the letter. Then let us examine the ledger. Let us examine the numbers you hold so dear. She presented Ensign Sharma's findings, the clear, irrefutable evidence of the Koru's energy fraud. The data scrolled across the public displays, a damning indictment of their hypocrisy. A palpable shift occurred in the chamber. The board representatives sat up straighter. The Talvorn delegate leaned forward, its raptor-like eyes fixed on the evidence. Fraud was a language every species understood. It was a violation not just of spirit, but of the very letter of the law that Corvallis held so sacred. The arbiter's composure cracked for the first time. A flicker of anger, or perhaps fear, crossed his placid features. These are creative accounting interpretations, he stammered, a necessary measure to ensure the continued stability of the Alaran economy. A lie, no matter how well-dressed, eventually trips on the truth. Stability. Rostova countered, her voice rising with controlled fire. Tell us about the stability of a family forced to give up their 9-year-old daughter to servitude. Tell us about the stability of a world where the mortality rate from overwork has tripled in a single generation. Let's add those numbers to your ledger, Arbiter. She flooded the inquiry with data. Medical records, population statistics, work quotas. She showed the human cost of the Koru's balance sheet. This was the heart of her strategy, to use the Koru's own obsession with data against them, but to infuse that data with the one thing they always ignored, the truth of the suffering it represented. Archimedes in the background was a silent storm of processing power, feeding her information, cross-referencing every claim the arbiter made in real time and finding the contradictions. The AI, once a voice of caution, had become her most potent weapon. It had learned that some truths could not be found in pure logic alone. Sometimes the most important data has a heartbeat. The inquiry continued for hours, a grueling dissection of centuries of Koru administration. Rostova and her team presented evidence of manipulated crop yields, suppressed technologies that would have made the Alara self-sufficient, and a systematic campaign to infantilize the population, making them ever more dependent on their supposed benefactors. With every revelation, the Koru's image of benevolent guides crumbled, revealing the parasitic entity beneath. They weren't uplifting a species, they were farming it. Finally, Rostova played her final card. Arbiter Corvallis, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. The original mandate contains a clause, does it not? A standard mentorship dissolution clause. It states that the agreement can be terminated when the junior party, in this case the Alara, achieves a state of technological and societal parity with their mentors, or when the mentors are found to have acted in profound bad faith. A clause you have conveniently omitted from every public summary of the mandate for the last 300 years. The truth, once buried, always finds its way to the light. The chamber fell into a stunned silence. The arbiter's face was a mask of disbelief. He had clearly believed that ancient clause was buried too deep in the archives for anyone to find. Archimedes had found it tucked away in a sub-annex of a diplomatic treaty that hadn't been referenced in centuries. The AI had done what the Koru had never anticipated. It had read everything. "We submit that the Koru have not only acted in bad faith," Rostova declared, her voice ringing with the force of conviction, "but they have actively and maliciously prevented the Alara from ever reaching a state where they could declare their independence. They have violated the very heart of the agreement they claim to uphold. On these grounds, we demand the immediate and unconditional dissolution of the Gratitude Mandate. We demand the liberation of the Alaran people, and we demand a full accounting, a mirror ledger of every credit, every resource, and every life stolen from them." The inquiry was no longer about a disputed invoice. It was about the soul of galactic law. Rostova had turned a simple commercial dispute into a referendum on the nature of justice itself. She had used the Koru's own tools, the law, the ledger, and the public record, to expose their crimes. Now all she could do was wait for the quorum to render its judgment. They built an empire on a lie. A single truth could bring it down. The hours that followed were the longest of Rostova's life. The quorum deliberated in a closed session. Their holographic forms vanished from the bridge. Jian stood beside her, his usual calm replaced by a nervous energy. "Did we do enough, Captain?" he asked quietly. Rostova looked at the image of Ilara still wrapped in its chains of light. "We did what was right," she answered. "The rest is up to them." She had put her faith in the system, the very system the Koru had so expertly manipulated. She had to believe that in the end, justice was more than just a matter of who had the better lawyers. Suddenly, the quorum reappeared. The lead delegate, a towering Talvorn with feathers of silver and gold, stepped forward. His voice boomed through the bridge's speakers. "The compact quorum has reached a verdict. On the matter of the Terran Alliance versus the Koru Enclave, we find—" He paused, the silence stretching for an eternity. "We find in favor of the Terran Alliance." A wave of relief washed over the bridge, so powerful it was almost physical. Cheers erupted from the crew, a spontaneous outburst of joy and triumph. But the verdict was only the beginning. Justice had to be enforced. The Talvorn delegate continued, his voice stern and uncompromising. "The Gratitude Mandate is hereby declared null and void, dissolved on the grounds of profound and sustained bad faith. All Koru assets within the Alara system are frozen. A full audit will be conducted by this quorum, and restitution will be made to the Alaran people." He then turned his gaze directly to the holographic representation of Arbiter Corvallis, who stood frozen in shock. Furthermore, the Koru Enclave's privileged trading status within the compact is suspended, pending a wider investigation into its commercial practices. It was a total victory, more complete than Rostova had dared to hope for. They had not just freed a single world, they had shattered the foundation of the Koru's predatory empire. The precedent was set. The era of debt slavery disguised as commerce was coming to an end. The chains of light around Alara flickered and died, their power conduits severed by the quorum's decree. For the first time in centuries, the planet shone with its own unburdened light. A debt paid in suffering can only be forgiven in freedom. Archimedes's avatar shimmered next to Rostova. Captain, the AI, said, its voice holding a new, almost imperceptible tone of something that might have been respect. "The mirror ledger maneuver you proposed is now authorized by the quorum. We have begun the process of returning the costs." On the main screen, a new kind of light show began. Energy, pure and brilliant, began to flow in the opposite direction. It streamed from Koru holdings, from their orbital stations and processing facilities, and was directed back towards Alara. The public ledger visible to the entire compact showed every transaction in real time. It was a transfer of wealth, a return of stolen life force on a scale never before witnessed. It was more than just restitution. It was a lesson broadcast to the galaxy. It was a statement that debts run both ways and that the cost of injustice will always eventually come due. This fleet, the Vindication, teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. The Koru had built their power on the principle that everything has a price. Rostova had used their own philosophy to present them with a bill they would be paying for generations. Sometimes the only way to fight a monster is to teach it how to count. The cost of this victory, however, was not zero. Rostova knew that the Koru, while legally defeated, were not gone. They were a powerful ancient species with influence in every corner of the compact. She had made a formidable enemy not just for herself, but for the entire Terran alliance. The political fallout from this would be immense. Diplomats and politicians far from the front lines of this legal battle would have to navigate the treacherous new landscape she had created. The first cost was a future filled with a new and powerful enemy. The second cost was more personal. In her relentless pursuit of justice for the Alara, she had pushed her crew to the breaking point. The weeks of round-the-clock legal research, the constant tension, the moral weight of an entire civilization on their shoulders, it had taken a toll. She saw the exhaustion in their faces, the weary relief that was more about survival than celebration. She had won, but the price had been paid in the well-being of the people she was responsible for. A captain's victory is always shared, but her burdens are hers alone. A victory that costs nothing is worth nothing. As the energy transfer continued, a message arrived from Alara. It was from the Elder. Her face, now projected on the main screen, was transformed. The lines of sorrow were still there, but they were softened by a look of profound, tearful joy. "You have given us back our sky." "Captain Rostova," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have given us back our children. You have reminded us that a promise is not a chain, but a seed. From this day forward, the people of Alara will remember your name. We will build a future worthy of the price you paid." Rostova watched the Alaran people celebrating in their streets, their faces turned up towards the heavens, towards the ship that had brought them their liberation. The anger that had sustained her for so long was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet sense of fulfillment. It was not a fiery, triumphant feeling, but a calm, steady warmth. It was the feeling of a job well done, of a promise kept, of a balance restored to the universe. The universe does not bend toward justice, but it can be held to account. Jian stepped up beside her once more, his professionalism returning. "Captain, we have a new problem. With the Koru's trading status revoked, dozens of systems in this sector are facing economic collapse. They were dependent on Koru supply lines. We've started receiving distress calls. This was the next escalation, the unintended consequence of their victory. The Koru's corrupt system, for all its evils, was a pillar of the regional economy. By kicking it out, they had created a power vacuum, a void, that was quickly being filled with chaos and desperation." Rostova took a deep breath. The fight wasn't over. It had just changed. "Archimedes," she said, her mind already racing ahead, formulating a new plan. "Begin cross-referencing the needs of those systems with the production capabilities of Alara. Calculate potential trade routes, resource exchanges, and mutual defense pacts. We didn't just come here to break something. We came here to build something better." She was turning from prosecutor to architect, from a warrior of the law to a pioneer of a new, fairer economy. The best way to defeat a bad system is to replace it with a good one. Her new mission was clear: to forge a regional alliance, a network of worlds, based on the principles of mutual respect and fair trade, with a newly freed Alara at its heart. It would be harder than fighting the Koru. It would require patience, diplomacy, and an enormous amount of work. But it was the only way to ensure that their victory was not just a single moment of triumph, but the beginning of a lasting change. She had locked in the precedent in the courtroom. Now she had to lock it in through practice. She addressed her crew, her voice resonating with a new sense of purpose. "Our work here is not done," she told them. "We have torn down a corrupt house. Now we will help our new friends build a stronger one in its place. This is what the Vindication does. We don't just fight the darkness. We light the lamps that keep it at bay." The exhausted faces of her crew found a new spark of determination. They were tired, but they were not broken. They were the crew of the Vindication, and their work had just begun. A single light can push back 1,000 shadows. As the Vindication moved to a new orbital position, coordinating relief efforts and economic treaties, Rostova felt a sense of profound clarity. The human moral line, her unwavering belief in right and wrong, had been challenged by the cold calculus of Archimedes and the cynical legalism of the Koru. But in the end, it had not been a weakness. It had been her greatest strength. It had been the compass that guided her through the legal maze, the fire that forged her resolve. It was the one variable the Koru's perfect system had never been able to account for. Archimedes' avatar flickered beside her. "Captain, the AI said I have completed my analysis of your strategy. My initial calculations based on legal precedent and risk assessment indicated a 92.8% probability of failure. I must conclude that my models were incomplete. They lacked a variable for what you would call principled reckoning. It was the closest the AI had ever come to admitting it was wrong." Rostova smiled. "That's the variable we humans bring to the table, Archimedes. Don't ever leave it out of your calculations again." The AI's light pattern pulsed a silent acknowledgement. It was learning. The machine, built on pure logic, was learning about the power of the human heart. The final calculation is always a human one. The quiet hum of the bridge was a fragile thing, easily broken. It shattered with the first distress call. It came from a mining outpost in the asteroid belt of a neighboring system, a gruff human voice laced with panic. "Vindication. This is Henderson's claim. Our life support recyclers are failing. The Koru freighter with the replacement filters is 3 days overdue. They're not responding to hails. We have maybe 48 hours of air." Before Jian could even log the call, another came in. This one was from a medical station, a cool, professional voice fraying at the edges. A shipment of tailored retrovirals essential for containing a local plague had vanished from the Koru-managed shipping manifests. Hundreds of lives were now at risk. Then came another and another. A food shipment for a colony world. A power conduit for a deep space research array. A terraforming catalyst for a fledgling world. The entire sector was a complex machine, and the Koru had been its central gear. Rostova had just ripped that gear out, and the machine was grinding to a catastrophic halt. This was the true insidious nature of their control. They hadn't just enslaved the Alara with debt. They had made the entire region addicted to their presence. Their system wasn't just cruel, it was load-bearing. Their absence was as powerful a weapon as their presence. They knew this would happen, Jian said, his face grim, as he coordinated emergency supply runs from the Vindication's own limited stores. This is their retaliation. They're letting the sector tear itself apart and plan to blame it on us. He was right. The Koru were not launching a military strike. They were simply stopping. They had ceased all operations, recalled their fleets, and gone silent. They had created a vacuum, and they were content to watch the galaxy rush in and suffocate. Rostova's mind raced. Her victory in the inquiry, it felt hollow now, a single battle won in a war she was just beginning to understand. Freeing the Alara was not enough. You couldn't free one person in a prison block and call the job done. You had to tear the whole prison down and build a city in its place. Archimedes, she commanded, her voice cutting through the rising tide of panic on the bridge. I need a new map, not a star chart, a supply chain map. Show me every dependency, every route, every critical shipment that was handled by the Koru. They had to unravel a web spun over centuries. The AI's light lattice expanded, filling the main viewer with a dizzying network of lines and nodes. It was a web of terrifying complexity, a tapestry of life and death woven with the threads of commerce. Red lights began to flash across the map, signifying catastrophic failures. Henderson's claim, the medical station, the colony world. It was a plague of collapsing systems spreading faster than they could respond. We can't plug all these holes, Captain Gian stated, the grim reality of their situation settling in. We're one ship. We don't have the resources to replace the Koru's entire logistical network. Rostova stared at the map, at the blinking red lights that represented thousands, perhaps millions of lives. Her moral line felt less like a firm piece of ground and more like a tightrope swaying over an abyss. The cost of victory was climbing higher with every passing minute. A righteous act can still have ruinous consequences. Her first priority was Ilara. She opened a channel to the new provisional government led by the elder she had spoken to before, whose name was Lyra. The elder's face was a mixture of joy and profound anxiety. Captain, she began, we are free and we are grateful, but we are also adrift. The Koru managed everything. Our power grids, our water purification, our atmospheric processors. We don't know the master codes. We don't know the maintenance schedules. We are flying a ship we did not build. The Koru had not just been masters. They had been caretakers in the way a farmer cares for his livestock. They had ensured the herd was fed and watered the better to be fleeced. The Alarons had been stripped of the knowledge of their own survival. This was the deepest collar, the one forged for the mind. We will help you. Rostova assured her, projecting a confidence she did not entirely feel. Archimedes is already working on bypassing their system locks. We will teach you to fly your own ship again. True freedom isn't given. It must be learned. While the Vindication's engineering teams worked with the Alarans to reclaim their own infrastructure, Rostova turned her attention to the wider crisis. The solution, she knew, had to come from the people of the sector themselves. She couldn't be their savior, but she could be their architect. Archimedes, using the new economic data from Alara's recovered ledgers, identify systems with complementary needs and resources. Who has a surplus of water ice, who needs it? Who manufactures the filters Henderson's claim requires? Who can synthesize the retrovirals? The AI began to draw new lines on the map, faint, hopeful threads connecting the desperate points of light. A new web, a potential network of mutual aid began to form. Commander Lee Rostova ordered, open a multi-system channel. Invite every colony governor, every station master, every trading guild in this sector to a conference. The Koru are gone. It's time we learned to talk to each other. A vacuum can be filled with chaos, or it can be filled with community. The conference was a disaster. The bridge of the Vindication became a cacophony of angry, frightened voices. Species that had been rivals for centuries, their animosity kept in check only by Koru trade agreements, were now at each other's throats. They blamed each other. They blamed the Koru. And most of all, they blamed her. A bulky four-armed being from a heavy-gravity world slammed his fists on a console. Your crusade for justice has doomed us human. The Koru were parasites. Yes, but they were predictable parasites. You have replaced them with anarchy. Another voice, a sibilant whisper from a reptilian trader, agreed. The Terran Alliance meddles where it is not wanted. You have broken the system, Captain Rostova. You are now responsible for the pieces. They were demanding that she fix what she had broken, that she take the Koru's place as the central authority. They wanted a new master, a benevolent one perhaps, but a master nonetheless. They had forgotten how to be free. They begged for a kinder cage, not for the key to their own. Rostova listened to the storm of accusations, her anger held in check by a cold, hard knot of resolve. She had known this would be difficult. She had not understood that the hardest part would be convincing people to save themselves. I am not your keeper, she said, her voice cutting through the noise, silencing the chamber. The Terran Alliance did not send me here to rule you. We came here to remind you that you have the right to rule yourselves. She gestured to the map Archimedes had created, the web of potential new trade routes. The resources you need exist within this sector. The ships to carry them are docked at your own stations. The Koru created a system of dependency, a hub-and-spoke model where all wealth and power flowed through them. I am proposing a new model, a network, a community, where you trade with each other, support each other as equals. Their chains were gone. Now they had to remember how to walk. Her words were met with silence, then skepticism. It was too idealistic, too difficult. An old fear is more comfortable than a new hope. But on Alara something was happening. Guided by Archimedes and the Vindication's crews, the Alarans had regained control of their primary power grid. Their first act as a free people was not to hoard that power, but to broadcast a message. To the Henderson's Claim mining outpost, Lyra's voice announced, transmitted across the sector. We have learned that our atmospheric processors generate a surplus of filtration units. We are dispatching a shipment immediately. No charge. Consider it a down payment on a new friendship. It was a single drop of hope in an ocean of despair. But it was a start. A few of the system governors began to talk to tentatively explore the new trade routes Rostova was proposing. A fragile, desperate new economy began to stitch itself together, thread by painful thread. It was chaotic. It was inefficient. But it was theirs. Rostova had given them a chance, and a brave few were willing to take it. A single act of generosity can be more powerful than 1,000 invoices. Just as a glimmer of hope appeared, the Koru made their move. It was not a fleet that arrived, but a single elegant courier ship. It delivered a proclamation to the compact quorum and a copy to Rostova. Arbiter Corvalis, his arrogance replaced by a mask of somber concern, was filing a countersuit. The charge: gross sector destabilization and reckless endangerment of sapient lives. He was formally accusing Captain Eva Rostova and the Terran Alliance of causing the humanitarian crisis that was now unfolding. The audacity Gian breathed reading the legal filing. He's using the chaos he created as a weapon against us. The document was a masterpiece of legal maneuvering. It was filled with heartfelt testimonials from the very people who had just been screaming at Rostova, the station masters, the colony governors. The Koru had approached them privately, offering to restore their supply lines, to bring back the stability they craved in exchange for their support in the lawsuit. They were painting Rostova not as a liberator, but as a reckless idealist whose actions had caused untold suffering. They were trying to prosecute her for the consequences of their own crimes. Archimedes, what's the legal standing? Rostova asked, her mind cold and clear. This was the second major escalation. The battlefield was shifting back to the courtroom, but the stakes were immeasurably higher. The claim has merit under the Compact's intervention. Accords, the AI responded. An intervening power can be held liable for foreseeable negative consequences that result from their actions. The Koru will argue that the collapse of the sector's economy was a foreseeable outcome. They will present themselves as the injured party forced to watch their meticulously managed trade network be destroyed. This was their endgame. They planned to win back everything they had lost, not with warships, but with tort law. If they won, the Compact would not only restore their control over Alara, but it would also impose massive reparations on the Terran Alliance, effectively crippling them for a generation. Rostova would be disgraced, a cautionary tale for any other captain who dared to challenge the established order. The law in the wrong hands is the most perfect of weapons. They are offering the sector a choice, Rostova mused, pacing the bridge. A quick, easy return to a stable prison, or the hard, uncertain struggle for true freedom. And they are betting that people will always choose the prison. She stopped, her eyes fixed on the star chart, where the first tentative lines of the new Alaran Trade Alliance were beginning to form. We have to prove them wrong. We have to prove that a system built on freedom is not only more just, but more resilient than a system built on control. The Compact scheduled a formal tribunal. This would be no mere inquiry. It would be a full trial with Rostova as the defendant. She had 2 weeks to prepare her case. 2 weeks to turn a chaotic fledgling economic alliance into a viable exhibit for the defense. The pressure was immense. Every delayed shipment, every starving colony would be a point for the prosecution. The Koru had set a trap, and she had walked right into it. Now she had to transform that trap into a stage. Sometimes the only way out is to go deeper in. The next 2 weeks were a blur of frantic activity. The Vindication became the mobile headquarters for the birth of a new civilization. Rostova was on the comms day and night, negotiating, cajoling, and inspiring. She was a diplomat, a logistician, and a crisis counselor all at once. Jian led the practical efforts, rerouting his security teams to protect the new trade lanes from pirates who were thriving in the chaos. Ensign Sharma, the young astrometrics officer who had found the first clue, now led a team building a new shared database of resources and needs, a public ledger for the entire sector. They faced setbacks at every turn. A fuel processing plant, newly independent, suffered a critical failure. A disagreement over currency exchange rates nearly derailed a vital food shipment. Old rivalries flared, threatening to tear the fragile alliance apart. With every problem, Rostova could feel the Koru's case against her getting stronger. She was failing. Her grand experiment in freedom was on the verge of collapse. A dream, when it meets reality, often begins to fray. A critical mystery began to emerge. The failures were too frequent, too specific. A shipment of grain would be rerouted to the wrong system, where it would spoil before it could be sent back. A vital piece of medical equipment would be sent without its power converter. Communications between new trading partners would mysteriously drop at the exact moment a deal was about to be struck. It felt like more than just bad luck or inexperience. It felt like sabotage. But there was no evidence, no trace of outside interference. It's the system itself, Archimedes announced late one night, its avatar pulsing with the intensity of a major discovery. Rostova was in her ready room, staring at a list of failed shipments, the weight of a dozen worlds on her shoulders. Captain, I have completed a deep-level audit of the entire sector's logistical network. The Koru did not merely operate the network. They designed it. They built it from the ground up. Every routing protocol, every inventory manifest, every transaction verification is based on their proprietary code. A system is more than its operators. It is the rules they leave behind. What have you found? Archimedes Rostova asked, a sense of cold dread creeping over her. It is elegant, the AI admitted, a rare note of professional admiration in its voice. They embedded a core principle into the very architecture of the network. A form of digital checksum I am calling the gratitude protocol. Every transaction, every piece of data must be verified by a Koru-certified server. When we severed their control, we severed the network's access to its own verification system. So, the glitches, that's the system trying to correct what it sees as errors, Rostova asked. Not precisely, Archimedes replied. The system is not just failing, it is being instructed to fail. I have found a hidden layer of code, a dormant virus. When the central Koru servers failed to respond, for a period of 72 hours, this virus activated. It does not destroy data. It subtly corrupts it. It introduces small, almost undetectable errors. It changes a single digit in a coordinate, alters a shipping quantity, swaps a delivery address. It is designed to make any non-Koru logistical system appear incompetent and unreliable. Their ultimate weapon wasn't a fleet. It was a bug in the code. Rostova finally understood. This was the Koru's masterpiece. They had anticipated that someone might one day defeat them, so they had poisoned the well. They had built a system that was designed to fail, without them ensuring that any attempt to replace them would descend into chaos, proving their own indispensability. They had planned for this very trial. They were not just accusing her of causing chaos. They had actively, secretly engineered it. This is our proof, Gian said, his eyes blazing with anger. This is the evidence that proves their bad faith. We take this to the tribunal. Rostova shook her head. It's not enough. They will claim it's a security feature, a dead man's switch to prevent their proprietary network from being used by unauthorized parties. They will bury us in technical arguments and legal jargon. The quorum will see it as a contract dispute, not a crime. We can't just show them the weapon. We have to show them the intent behind it. We have to show it to them in a way they can't ignore. You cannot prosecute a ghost in the machine with logic alone. A new plan began to form in Rostova's mind, a plan of breathtaking audacity. It was a plan that would leverage Archimedes' cold logic, Gian's practical expertise, and her own unwavering moral compass. It was a plan to turn the Koru's greatest weapon against them, not in a courtroom, but in the public ledger for the entire galaxy to see. Archimedes, she said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. You said the gratitude protocol was elegant. I want you to design something more elegant. I want you to design a mirror. The day of the tribunal arrived. The holographic chamber was more intimidating this time, the atmosphere more severe. Rostova stood alone, the sole representative of the Terran Alliance, the defendant, in a case that could shatter her career and her nation's standing in the galaxy. Arbiter Corvallis began the prosecution, his voice dripping with false sympathy. He presented a mountain of evidence, the distress calls, the failed shipments, the starving colonies. He painted a heartbreaking picture of a thriving sector plunged into chaos by one human's arrogant crusade. He wielded their suffering like a scalpel. Captain Rostova acted without foresight, without care for the consequences. Corvallis concluded, his gaze sweeping across the grim-faced judges. She broke a system that, for all its perceived flaws, worked. She offered a dream of freedom, but she has delivered a nightmare of anarchy. We ask this tribunal to hold her accountable for the suffering she has caused. We ask you to restore order, to restore our stewardship. When it was her turn, Rostova did not offer a rebuttal. She did not present counter-evidence. Instead, she simply said, the prosecution's description of the current situation is accurate. The sector is in chaos. people are suffering. The question before this tribunal is not if there is chaos, but why. She then yielded the floor to a special witness, the fleet-minded Archimedes, appearing as its simple, elegant lattice of light. A machine cannot lie. It can only present the data. Archimedes began by explaining the Koru's proprietary network, the deep structural control they held over every aspect of the sector's economy. Then it explained the discovery of the Gratitude Protocol, the hidden virus designed to create the very chaos the Koru were now prosecuting her for. As expected, the Koru's legal team objected, calling it a standard security feature. A malicious interpretation of a prudent safeguard, the arbiter sniffed. A safeguard can be tested, Archimedes stated in its calm, synthesized voice. I have designed a simple diagnostic tool, a mirror worm. It does not alter or damage the Koru's code in any way. It simply observes it and creates a public record of its function. With the tribunal's permission, I would like to run this diagnostic now. The judges, intrigued, agreed. The Koru, confident in their legal arguments, did not object. It was their fatal mistake. Pride is the most exploitable of all operating systems. On the main public viewer visible to everyone in the tribunal and the millions watching across the compact Archimedes, displayed the live code of the sector's logistical network. Then it released the mirror worm. It was a beautiful, shimmering line of code that flowed into the Koru's network. A moment later, a transaction appeared on the screen, a shipment of medical supplies from the new Alaran Alliance bound for a colony in desperate need. As the transaction entered the Koru-designed network, a flicker of red appeared. The Gratitude Protocol virus activated. A single digit in the destination coordinates was altered. The shipment was now heading for empty space. It was the smoking gun, the proof of sabotage. But Archimedes wasn't finished. The mirror worm did something else. The instant the malicious code acted, the mirror worm identified the Koru asset, closest to the point of corruption, a hidden data haven in a nearby nebula. It then performed a simple, perfectly legal action. It filed an invoice. On the public ledger, a new entry appeared. Recipient, Koru Enclave Data Haven 7. Billed for unsolicited data manipulation services. Amount 10,000 compact credits plus damages for the value of the lost medical cargo. The charge was automatically deducted from the Data Haven's operating budget. The Koru's own poison pill had been presented with a bill for the poison it was spreading. Corvalis's serene composure finally shattered. He stared at the screen in horror. This is illegal. You cannot access our private accounts. Archimedes' calm voice cut through his sputtering rage. We have not accessed any private accounts. The mirror worm uses only public data. It is a simple accounting tool. It observes an action, calculates its cost, and assigns liability. It is the very principle upon which the Koru Enclave built its empire. We are merely applying your own business model to you. The debt, after all, is not a metaphor. Another transaction appeared. A food shipment. The Koru virus corrupted it. The mirror worm instantly identified another hidden Koru asset and billed it for the damages. Then another and another. A flood of transactions began to pour across the screen. Every act of sabotage by the Koru's hidden virus was now generating an automatic, instantaneous, and legally unimpeachable financial penalty executed in the full light of the public record. The Koru's weapon was now liquidating their own empire, one corrupted data packet at a time. They were being bankrupted by their own malice. The tribunal chamber was in an uproar. The Koru lawyers were shouting, but Corvallis was silent, his face a mask of utter defeat. He had two choices: allow the mirror worm to continue bleeding his entire enclave dry in a matter of hours, or order his technicians to shut down the Gratitude Protocol. But to do that, he would have to admit that it existed, that it was under his control, and that it was malicious. He would be confessing to the very crime he had accused Rostova of committing. She had forced him to choose between bankruptcy and confession. With a barely perceptible nod, Corvallis conceded. He transmitted a coded sequence, and the red flickers of the virus across the network winked out. The sabotage stopped. The shipments began to flow correctly, and in that moment the entire case against Rostova evaporated. She had not just proven her innocence. She had proven their guilt in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. She had used their own system, their own philosophy, to force them to disarm themselves. The lead judge, the same stern Talvorn from the first inquiry, slammed his gavel. The sound echoed like a thunderclap. This tribunal finds the charges against Captain Eva Rostova to be baseless and retaliatory. The case is dismissed. A new investigation is hereby opened into the Koru Enclave for criminal conspiracy, reckless endangerment, and systemic market manipulation. The judgment was swift and absolute. The Koru's power was not just suspended, it was broken. A perfect cage is useless against someone who can turn the bars into a lens. In the aftermath, the new alliance, which the Alarans had started calling the Aurora Court, began to flourish. Freed from the subtle sabotage of the Koru network, and guided by the new open-source logistical software Archimedes had designed and distributed freely, the worlds of the sector began to connect to trade to thrive. It was not a perfect system. It was messy and human, filled with arguments and mistakes. But it was free. Rostova oversaw the transition, but she knew her time here was ending. Her victory had come at a cost. Commander Jian Li, her stoic and reliable first officer, had requested a transfer to a quiet teaching post. He was a good officer, a man of duty and action, but the endless high-stakes legal battles the war fought with clauses instead of cannons had worn him down. It was a quiet personal cost of her victory, a reminder that even bloodless wars have casualties. The second cost was political. The Terran Alliance, while publicly praising her victory, was privately nervous about the long-term commitment of supporting the new Aurora Court, a commitment Rostova had made on their behalf. Her career, while celebrated, was now viewed with a certain amount of caution by the Admiralty. She had become too good at breaking things. Every revolution creates as many problems as it solves. Before the Vindication departed, the Quorum delivered its final lasting judgment. In what would become known as the Rostova precedent, the compact outlawed proprietary control over essential interstellar infrastructure. All core logistical systems for trade and communication were to be open-source, their code subject to public audit. A civilization could no longer be held hostage by the very systems it relied on to survive. The public ledger entry for the new standard blinked across the galaxy, confirmed. Standing on the bridge, watching the new vibrant trade routes of the Aurora Court light up her screen, Rostova felt the familiar calm of a job well done. The anger that had once fueled her had been forged into something more durable, a deep, abiding sense of purpose. She had faced a system of perfect predatory logic and answered it with a messy, imperfect, but unbreakable human morality. She had held the universe to account, and for a brief shining moment, it had answered. Freedom is not the absence of chains. It is the courage to build something new in the space they leave behind. It is the hard, uncertain work of learning to walk on your own 2 feet, of choosing community over chaos, of betting on the messy, unpredictable, and ultimately unstoppable power of people who refuse to be a line item on someone else's ledger. It is the understanding that some debts can only be paid forward. The universe remembers the just.